Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the cold stone corridors of a medieval monastery, barefoot, wrapped in wool, and very, very hungry. Outside, the sky is still velvet black, not a hint of dawn yet, and the bell tower groans to life with a low, ancient clang. You jolt awake, not to birdsong or sunlight, but to the sound of obligation. You shuffle from your wooden cot, rough blanket falling away. The air bites. There's no fire lit yet, because who needs warmth at 4 a.m.? Right, you grab your habit, still slightly damp from yesterday's wash, and pull it over your tunic. There's a single thought in your mind, one hope pulling you toward the dim chapel like gravity. Breakfast. You're starving, but you already know, today, like most days, you're not getting much. You trudge through cloister halls worn smooth by centuries of identical footsteps. Brother Thomas coughs quietly beside you, clearly awake, but like you, still bound to silence. The rule of Saint Benedict says, no unnecessary speech, which conveniently includes your urge to complain that your stomach sounds like an angry badger. The chapel service comes first, of course, matins. Long before your spoon sees a bowl, your ears get a full dose of Latin chanting, and your knees endure extended prayer. Your stomach growls once, then louder, then mercifully. Someone else's growls even louder. You glance around. Was it Brother Matthew? Possibly. He's got the look of a man who dreams of bread crusts. Eventually, after prayers, incense, and just a sprinkle of existential dread, you're allowed to walk toward the refectory. This is your breakfast hall, but don't imagine a cozy table spread with warm muffins and butter. Instead, think stone benches, high ceilings, and a long table lined with sleepy men trying not to drool. Today's menu, gruel. Again, it's barley gruel, thin and barely salted. It's served warm, at least, ladled from a great iron pot that looks like it once doubled as a torture device. You sit, hands in your lap, waiting for the reader to begin. That's right, mealtime isn't just eating time. One brother reads aloud from scripture while the others chew slowly and contemplate eternity. You sneak a glance at your bowl. It's not exciting. It never is, but it's food, barely. You lift your spoon, wooden, a bit warped, and begin. The first bite tastes like water and memories. Not bad memories, just distant ones. There's a comfort in the blandness, a warmth that's oddly soothing, like your tongue has stopped asking for excitement and started asking for peace. Across the table, someone sneezes into their robe. No one reacts. You're not even allowed to say bless you, which feels ironic given the spiritual setting. This gruel is barley-based, because wheat is too luxurious for breakfast. Oats are a rarity in your region. But barley? Barley's abundant. Barley is loyal. Barley is your best friend. And also, barley is the reason your dreams taste like glue. Historians still argue whether gruel was intended as penitence or simply practicality. But after 6 days of it in a row, you suspect a bit of both. There's no fruit, no jam, and certainly no coffee. In fact, you've never even heard of coffee. Your idea of a morning pick-me-up is hoping today's spoonfuls are slightly less clumpy, and yet you feel full, not stuffed, not joyful, but full enough to keep walking, to keep praying, to keep surviving this strange, rigid rhythm of monastic life. The kind of full that doesn't distract you, doesn't excite you, just holds you steady. The reader drones on about humility, and as you slurp the final bit from your bowl, you start to wonder, is this how the saints stayed so calm? Were they just mildly underfed for 40 years? A bell rings. Meal over. You wipe your spoon, tuck it into your robe pocket, and rise. No talking, just nods. The day stretches ahead. Prayers, study, labor, more prayers. But for now, you've eaten. Sort of. And tonight? Well, there might be beans. By mid-morning, your stomach has already started composing poetry about barley. It's not hunger exactly. It's something more existential. You feel like a person who was once fed, but only in theory. As the sun lifts above the cloister walls, the bells toll again. This time not for prayer, but to remind you of the passage of time and how far away lunch still is. You're halfway through your morning tasks, copying a psalter in the scriptorium, or maybe hauling firewood with Brother Marius, whose silence always feels slightly aggressive. And though your fingers are busy, your mind wanders to breakfast, and to how breakfast is always the same. Gruel, gruel, and more gruel. Barley, if the stores are healthy. Millet or rye, if not. Occasionally, oats when a trade wagon from the north brings them in. The cook, Brother Anselm, insists he can tell the difference between 6 types of grain with his eyes closed. You believe him because he once named a mushroom by smell and saved everyone from an unfortunate digestive experience. Gruel is served in a bowl that always seems slightly chipped. It's poured with the grace of a man who's done it 10,000 times, and it is, in every possible sense, gray. Not metaphorically, actually gray. The steam curls up in solemn spirals, and you think this is what fog tastes like. The texture, somewhere between soup and punishment. You try to chew, but there's nothing to bite, so instead you sip, as if it were a broth. It coats your teeth, your tongue gives up, your stomach shrugs, and yet somehow it works. It warms your core, it slides down with enough weight to anchor your soul for a few more hours of silent devotion. There's something oddly zen about it, like a culinary monk in itself, humble, undemanding, loyal to the cause. Still, you can't help remembering the legend of Brother Thaddeus, who once tried to spice up the morning gruel with wild garlic. His punishment, 2 weeks of extra kitchen duty and a scolding, so quiet it echoed. But now and then, there's variation. Feast days come with a different consistency. Gruel thickened slightly with egg yolk or goat's milk. If the abbot's feeling generous, that version sticks to your ribs, and your prayers float a little higher afterward. Historians still argue whether these additions were allowed under strict Benedictine rule or slipped in as liturgical exceptions. The debate gets surprisingly passionate in academic circles. You once overheard 2 visiting scholars nearly come to blows over a parchment suggesting a monk had consumed honey before prime. But there's more to the gruel story than repetition. On days when the monastery receives guests, visiting nobles, abbots, or weary pilgrims, the kitchen steps up. Your bowl might include cracked pepper or chopped herbs like parsley or chervil from the garden. The rumor is that once, during the summer of the locusts, a monk even added saffron, but no one will confirm it. Probably a legend. Probably. The reality is that most mornings, you wake up knowing exactly what breakfast will be. You don't hope for something new. You don't long for sweetness. You just eat. And oddly, the simplicity of it becomes its own comfort. You learn to taste the nuance in blandness. The way barley tastes different if soaked overnight versus boiled straight. The way temperature shifts the flavor slightly. The way eating with 10 other silent men turns even monotony into ritual. You begin to notice which brother stirs slowly, which gulps greedily, which always sneaks an extra ladle when he thinks no one is watching. Spoiler, everyone is watching, always, and eventually you find peace with it. You stop craving novelty. You stop dreaming of roasted chestnuts or jammy tarts. You start thinking in shades of gruel. You are now, in every sense, one with the porridge. By late morning, the meal has faded from your belly and your memory. You've returned to your daily rhythm. Maybe you're helping Brother Cuthbert in the garden, or illuminating a tiny golden pea in a manuscript that hasn't seen the light of day since Charlemagne was a boy. But part of you, deep down, is already wondering what's for lunch. Spoiler, still not meat. The bells chime again, and it's the kind of sound that makes your stomach perk up like a dog hearing a treat bag. Not because it's time to eat yet, but because it's the preamble, the sacred build-up, the ritual of waiting. It's one of the many fast days on the monastic calendar. And even if you haven't mastered the art of spiritual enlightenment, you've absolutely memorized which days come with fewer calories. Fasting, you learn, doesn't always mean no food. In your monastery, like many across medieval Europe, fasting means abstaining from meat and dairy, and sometimes eggs, oil, or anything else that might feel like joy. You're allowed one meal, and it cannot happen before noon. So here you are, hands stained from garden work, robes smelling faintly of turnip, kneeling in the chapel, while your stomach politely wonders what it did to deserve this life. The irony, there are more fasting days than feasting ones. The church calendar is full of them. Advent, Lent, Fridays, Wednesdays, Vigil days, and days before big feast days. There are minor fasts and major fasts. One monk even claimed to fast from complaining, which lasted all of 2 days. And during Lent, forget about feeling full. Lent turns the monastery kitchen into a performance art piece on how to make legumes seem festive. Historians still argue whether these fasts were truly observed with rigid adherence or quietly bent to fit local customs. Some abbots were sticklers, others were creative. In some coastal monasteries, the no-meat rule inspired a flexible interpretation of what counted as fish. Beavers, otters, also fish. One particularly ambitious monk even classified barnacle geese as sea creatures, since they were believed to hatch from driftwood. It was theological gymnastics, and frankly impressive. On a fast day, the kitchen smells like boiled effort. The main dish is likely a pottage, basically a thick soup of peas, onions, cabbage, and sometimes barley if you're lucky. You sit on the same cold bench as yesterday, spoon in hand, bowl before you. But the difference today is that this is your only meal. There's no second course, no sneaky bread on the side, just one humble dish, and a lot of contemplation. You chew slowly. The flavor is, let's say, subtle. Some days it's almost comforting, like you're eating something a kind grandmother might make if she were deeply concerned about your soul. Other days it's so bland, you forget whether you've taken a bite or not. Today falls in the middle, warm, filling-ish, and undeniably green-tasting. Across the table, Brother Gideon mutters a blessing so quietly, you're not even sure he finished it. No one speaks. The reader begins, a passage about humility. Of course, you pretend to nod thoughtfully as you crunch down on a slightly undercooked lentil. Still, there's a strange piece to this. Your body slows, your thoughts soften. You're not hangry, you're contemplative. Kind of. You think about the monks who came before you, who chewed this same soup, who fasted through storms, plagues, and invasions. You think about how none of them ever saw a pizza. Poor souls. But fasting has its perks. It makes feast days feel feastier. It makes simple food feel sacred. And it makes you notice everything. The crispness of a raw turnip, the strange sweetness in boiled garlic, the nutty chew of whole peas that didn't quite break down in the pot. Some monks swear fasting brings clarity. Others say it brings better dreams. You're not convinced yet, but you admit you do dream more vividly on an empty stomach. Once you dreamt your spoon turned into a goose and honked scripture at you. A sign? Probably not, but you've never looked at your spoon quite the same. You finish your meal slowly, chasing every last bit of pottage with the practiced grace of someone who knows there's no second chance coming. The bowl is wiped clean with a crust of bread you weren't supposed to have. But hey, Brother Thomas looked the other way. As you rise, the hunger isn't gone, but it's changed. It's quieter, more patient, like it's learning to fast too. Lunch, when it finally arrives, is the one moment in your monastic day that flirts with indulgence. Not in the way of spiced lamb or roasted apples, not even close, but in the quiet ritual of sitting down to a warm, structured meal with your fellow monks. Structured being the key word. You gather in the refectory, that long, echoing hall where the only decoration is devotion. The windows are narrow, the light thin, and the benches cold. Everything in here is designed to keep you focused on your inner life, or maybe just too uncomfortable to fall asleep. There's no menu, there's no waiter, there's just what's prepared, and you'll eat it without complaint, or at least, without verbal complaint. Rolling your eyes counts as silent protest, and yes, even monks do it. 2 courses, if the day allows. That's the norm, and no talking. As you sit, your hands folded, the reader for the day steps up to the pulpit at the corner. He opens a book, not a cookbook, tragically, but a collection of sermons or letters from saints, long dead, and likely long hungry. He begins to read, slowly, clearly, and all the while, you and the rest of your silent brethren begin your meal. You lift the wooden spoon again. This time, it's a thick pottage, lentils, onion, maybe some garlic, a few chunks of turnip, and once, scandalously, a sliver of dried plum. The cook insists it was accidental. No one believes him. You chew with care, as much out of reverence as fear of splashing. Splashing is frowned upon. It draws attention. Attention brings side eyes. Side eyes might be reported. This is, after all, a sacred space. Gossip travels fast on silent tongues. The first course is earthy and simple. It tastes like soil, in a good way, like you're eating something the ground grew slowly and sincerely. Then the second course arrives. Today it's bread, coarse, dark, and heavy. No butter, no spread, but it's bread, and that means you're living large. You break off a piece, dip it in whatever's left of your pottage, and chew slowly. There's comfort in the rough texture, the way it makes your jaw work for it. Historians still argue whether monks truly stuck to the rule's dietary simplicity, or if, over time, they accidentally allowed luxuries to slip in. There are records of some abbeys enjoying salted herring, almond milk, even imported spices, though always under the name of necessity or charity. Your monastery? Strict, but not cruel. The abbot once allowed figs on St. Cuthbert's Day. A miracle, some say. A myth, others argue. While you eat, the reader drones on about temptation. You chew in rhythm with the verses, swallowing quietly. The clink of spoon on bowl is the only other sound. Even your thoughts begin to quiet down, lulled by the monotony and the warm fullness spreading from your center. You glance around. Brother Hugo eats with slow reverence. Brother Malachi has a habit of tucking his napkin into his collar like a toddler. Brother Felix closes his eyes between bites, as if meditating on each mouthful. Maybe he's just sleepy. The meal ends not with a bell, but with the reader's final words. He pauses, closes the book, and everyone rises, bowing, silently thanking the food. The moment, the stillness, no dessert, no applause, just clean-up duty and an afternoon of more copying, more digging, more chanting, or if you're unlucky, more time in the cold scriptorium with a busted ink pot. But something about that meal lingers. It fills you, yes, but it also centers you, not with joy, but with rhythm. This is what you do. You eat what's given. You eat it in silence. You listen. You chew. You exist within a shared pause. As you head back to your work, you tuck your spoon into your robe again. It's warm from your hand. Maybe it's your favorite possession, if monks are even allowed to have those. And later, after more labor, more prayer, more time with your own thoughts, you'll return for your final meal of the day. A collation, they call it. Sounds fancy. Spoiler, it isn't. By the time the sun tilts low over the cloister walls, your stomach is gently hinting, perhaps you were mistaken. Perhaps that midday meal wasn't quite enough. You You try to ignore it. After all, your next encounter with food is coming. Eventually, in the form of something very medieval and very beige: pottage. Ah yes, pottage. The eternal stew. The culinary wallpaper of your monastic life. It greets you nearly every day in some form or another, and after weeks of silence and repetition, you've become strangely attached to it. Not in a romantic way, of course, but in the way one might grow fond of a lumpy pillow that's shaped exactly like your head. Tonight, like many evenings, the pottage is built on legumes, split peas, fava beans, maybe even chickpeas, if the monastery got lucky with trade. The base is thick, hearty, and rib-sticking. You're not sure what's in it anymore. You stopped asking around week 2. Probably onions, definitely some kind of stock, maybe vegetable, maybe yesterday's pottage. Still, it's warm, and that's what counts. You carry your bowl with quiet reverence, like a relic, and sit at your usual spot. You already know Brother Hugo will be 2 spoons ahead of you, and Brother Malachi will still be saying grace by the time you're halfway through. That's okay. There's no race, just pottage. You dip your spoon and begin. The texture is familiar, slightly lumpy, slightly sticky. It coats your mouth in a way that makes you wonder if it's partially a beverage. You chew anyway. The flavor, it tastes like effort, like every vegetable that ever met a boiling pot and gave its life for a higher purpose. Occasionally, there's variation. Once, you tasted parsnip. Once, something that might have been leeks. And once, a true miracle, you bit into a shard of walnut. An accident, surely, but you savored it like a gold coin in your mouth. Historians still argue whether pottage was primarily an economical choice or a spiritual one. The answer is probably both. It stretched limited ingredients. It warmed the body. It kept you regular, which, let's be honest, was important in a world without modern plumbing. More than that, though, pottage was democratic. Everyone ate it. The prior, the scribes, the novices, even Brother Alaric, who somehow always managed to spill a little on his habit. It was the great equalizer of the refectory. What made it special, if you could call it that, was what the kitchen added when they could. Sometimes grains like spelt or barley were mixed in, giving it a chew that felt almost meaty. Other times, leftover bread crusts were broken up and stirred through until they vanished into mush. You learned not to look too closely. You also learned that pottage logic is real. The monks joke about it. If a food item exists, it can go in the pot. That includes wild greens from the garden, mushroom caps, apple peels, and on one desperate winter evening, an entire turnip carved with a smiley face. No one fessed up to that one. The face bobbed around the pot for hours before it disintegrated into what we'll call turnip essence. Despite the monotony, there's something satisfying about it. You know how long it takes to simmer. You know how it should smell when it's ready. You even know when Brother Anselm got distracted because the texture's a little too thin. There are no spices, of course. Salt is precious, and pepper is exotic. You heard a story once of a monastery that received a shipment of cinnamon and didn't know what to do with it. They tried it in gruel. The results were mixed. Tonight's pottage is dense, nearly solid. You could stand a spoon in it like a flag. It steams up into your face and softens your thoughts. It's quiet in the hall. Only the soft clink of wood on wood, the occasional scrape of a bowl being repositioned, the sigh of a monk settling into the rhythm of evening consumption. You eat slowly, not because it's delicious, but because it's filling. And because eating slowly means delaying the return to labor or silence or vespers. This is your moment of pause, your moment of something warm inside. And as you lift the final spoonful, you think to yourself, I never knew so many shades of beige existed. Beige broth, beige beans, beige life, but also peace. No meat, but fish, if you're lucky. That's the silent motto etched into your soul at this point, though no one ever says it aloud, mostly because, again, you're not allowed to talk, but also because it's just understood. Meat is off limits. As a monk, your body is not your temple. It's more like a rented room you keep tidy while focusing on bigger, holier things. And in the monastic worldview, meat, rich, heavy, blood-filled meat, was believed to stir the passions. Too much fire in the belly, they'd say. A warm steak today could become a lustful thought tomorrow. So out it went. But fish was the loophole God didn't close. It was cold, wet, and far too slippery to inspire sin. Which is why, during fasts or Fridays or all the days that just felt like Fridays, you were allowed to have it. Sort of. What fish you got, and how often, depended entirely on geography. If your monastery was near a river, congratulations, you had access to eels, trout, pike, and perch. If it was coastal, you might get herring or cod. And if it was nowhere near water, well, then fish became more of a theological exercise than a dietary one. Tonight's dinner is pottage again, but with fish scraps added in. You can tell from the smell, which is vaguely aquatic and slightly hopeful. As you approach the pot, you spot the silvery flicker of something that once had gills, possibly a smelt, possibly a miracle. You ladle the pottage into your bowl, noting the tiny cube of white fish bobbing near the surface. One piece, that's the treasure. You'll ration it like a king hoarding coin, maybe save it for the last bite, if you're strong. The taste, mildly fishy, in a comforting briny way. The broth is thicker tonight, the color slightly off from usual beige. It's leaning into foggy sea foam. You chew slowly, savoring every ounce of whatever this fish used to be. Fish days were never meant to feel indulgent. But let's be honest, they kinda did. You heard whispers of one monastery that raised their own carp in indoor ponds, turning the refectory into a glorified fish nursery. A few abbots got testy about it. Of course, it smelled weird, they said, but monks gotta eat. Historians still argue whether fish was truly seen as penitential, or if its religious status was just a convenient way to sneak in protein. Some monasteries, particularly wealthier ones, got bold with it. They served dishes like fish pie, or eels stuffed with herbs, or dried cod stewed with almond milk. Yours, less bold, more broth forward. Then there are the weird ones, the loophole fish. Beaver tails, as mentioned before, were classified as fish because beavers swim. Don't think about it too hard. The ruling came down from some extremely hungry monks who probably lost a debate and gained a tail. Also, puffins were sometimes permitted, and barnacle geese, which were believed to grow from driftwood in the sea. You suspect none of these were ever technically approved by Rome, but by the time anyone checked, dinner had already been eaten. You finish your meal, the little fish cube having dissolved somewhere along the way. It wasn't big, it wasn't particularly flavorful, but it was different. And that difference makes you feel oddly blessed. Brother Anselm once tried to make fish sauce, fermented in the Roman style, using anchovies. It was ambitious. The smell lingered for weeks. It is now banned. Still, variety matters. And tonight, you're full enough to stand slowly, thank God quietly, and walk your bowl to the washing trough with a belly that feels ever so slightly celebratory. You return to the cloister with the taste of salt still on your tongue, thinking, just maybe, there will be more fish tomorrow. You try not to hope, but it's hard not to. You step outside after the meal, and the air greets you with the chill of early evening. It smells faintly of soil and damp herbs, the kind that grow low and stubborn in your monastery's carefully tended garden. You stretch your back, just a little, and glance toward the low stone wall that surrounds the garden beds. You know them well. What you grow, you eat. And you've grown a lot of things that would terrify a modern salad. This garden is the secret heartbeat of the monastery. Rows upon rows of leeks, onions, garlic, and a scrappy collection of leafy greens that don't quite qualify as lettuce. There's cabbage, of course, big, waxy, and prehistoric looking. There's parsley and chervil, maybe a few struggling carrots with the personalities of root-bound introverts. And here's the thing, you're responsible for it, or at least partially. Everyone takes a turn in the garden, even the abbot, who once pulled a weed so dramatically that Brother Felix wrote a poem about it. The garden is humble but loyal. It feeds you, flavors your stews, and fills the gaps that barley and beans can't. That handful of wilted sorrel you plucked last week, it ended up brightening the gruel. That accidental handful of nettles, Brother Anselm's hands haven't forgiven you. You move carefully among the beds, pulling out a few yellowing leaves, brushing soil off the radish tops. You don't grow food for pleasure here, you grow it for survival. But survival has its own beauty. When you hold a freshly harvested onion, there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing it will be in tomorrow's pot. And sometimes you find something extra. A clump of mushrooms after a rain, wild mint creeping in from the fence line, even a wayward gooseberry bush that refuses to die despite Brother Marius accidentally sitting on it last summer. Historians still argue whether monastic gardens were managed purely for food, or if their layout reflected spiritual symbolism, the four cardinal directions, the walled Edenic metaphor. You suspect both. You've seen Brother Hugo weep over a particularly symmetrical row of cabbages. Inside the kitchen, the ingredients from the garden come alive, not in a thrilling MasterChef way, but in the quiet logic of necessity. Everything has its role. The leeks add sweetness, the garlic adds heat, the cabbage adds bulk, and occasionally regret. Your favorite, onions, because when they're roasted, they taste like caramel and forgiveness. You also grow herbs, though not many. Sage, thyme, maybe a stingy patch of dill. These aren't sprinkled for flair. They're simmered to disguise the bitterness of turnips or to soften the sharpness of certain beans that cook like gravel. Once, Brother Anselm tried to create something new. Monastic salad. It was 3 greens, 1 edible flower, and a dressing made entirely of vinegar. Everyone applauded politely. No one asked for seconds. Sometimes, surplus vegetables are dried and stored. The cellar shelves are lined with neatly tied bundles of herbs, shriveled roots, and jars of pickled onions that look like specimens. You take comfort in that, knowing that what you grew in May might see you through December. It's all deeply seasonal. You feel the year turn through your taste buds. Spring means tender greens and first shoots. Summer means root vegetables that haven't turned bitter yet. Autumn means squash and beans with ambition. Winter, well, winter is mostly things that are hard to chew and harder to enjoy. And still, there's joy, small joy, quiet joy. The kind of joy that comes from watching a row of garlic finally stand upright, from spotting a slug and relocating it before it claims your celery, from knowing that tonight's dinner came from 20 feet away, pulled by your own muddy hands. You walk back toward the cloister, passing the kitchen as Brother Anselm lowers the shutters. The windows glow with the last heat of the hearth. The garden behind you rests in shadow, spent from the day, holding tomorrow's meal under the soil. Your belly is full enough, your heart oddly warmed by the thought of cabbage. Tonight, the air feels different. There's a whisper of excitement slipping through the cloister like incense before a feast day. You can smell it. Bake something wafting faintly from the kitchen. Hushed steps are quicker. Faces are slightly brighter. Even Brother Marius, usually as stern as boiled oats, has a hint of a smirk. You know what this means. It's a feast day. But don't get too excited. This is still a monastery. No one's popping champagne or juggling roasted chickens. The indulgence here is more like, we added honey, That's the monastic version of fireworks. Feast days honor saints, holy events, or momentous calendar days, and they offer rare permission for a bit of celebratory cuisine. The rule is still silence at meals, but you can practically feel the joy vibrating in the air. Some monks fidget in their seats. Others hum quietly through their noses. Brother Hugo raises his eyebrows theatrically before every bite, which is basically a full-body scream by monastic standards. The first course arrives. It's baked fish, gently seasoned with garden herbs, likely thyme or sage. It sits beside a heap of carrots glazed in honey, shining like a holy relic. You stare at it for a moment, almost suspicious. Then you glance at Brother Anselm, who just barely winks. A feast day miracle. The fish is soft, flaky, and warm. Real protein. Not a suggestion of nutrition, but the actual thing. You chew slowly, reverently. You haven't tasted something this intentionally seasoned since Epiphany. The honeyed carrots nearly make you tear up. Sweet, tender, and entirely guilt-free. For today, there's also bread, not the coarse, chewy kind, but a finer one, still dark but softer, almost fluffy. It's rare. It might even be sifted twice. Brother Thomas mouths angel loaf across the table. Then the shocker. Wine. It's a dark, earthy red, just a small cup, no refills. And no, it's not the sacramental kind. This is for feasting. This is the monastery saying, "Good job. You've made it to Saint Whoever's Day. Have a sip." You drink it like it's liquid rubies. It burns, then softens, then warms all the way down. Historians still argue whether monastic feast meals were spiritual rewards or just brief pauses in culinary monotony. Some believe they served as reminders of heaven's bounty. Others argue it was a way to keep monks from sneaking snacks on fast days. You're not sure, but you do know that eating this way slowly in silence, surrounded by 40 silent men and one loudly humming monk, is oddly comforting, almost luxurious, in a muted kind of way. And there's dessert. Yes, dessert. A small dried fig tart, barely sweet, the crust a little too hard, but still, unmistakably dessert. You chew carefully, each bite slower than the last, as if you're rationing happiness. Even the reader seems to slow down, dragging out the scripture to match your desire to linger. No one speaks, but everyone is beaming on the inside. Once, years ago, a monk wrote in the margins of his psalter, "The feast fish tasted like the prayers of angels." You think you understand what he meant now. As the meal ends, you bow your head, grateful and a little melancholy. These moments are rare, and that's what makes them rich. Tomorrow, it'll be back to pottage, back to fasting, back to chewing like it's your job. But tonight, you walk slower, fuller. The candlelight in the cloister seems softer. The air smells faintly of thyme and joy. And when you lie in bed later, your stomach content and your mind adrift, you'll dream of that one honeyed carrot as if it were a golden apple from Eden. You wake up the next morning with the faint, sweet memory of a feast day clinging to your dreams. There was honey, fish, soft bread, and yes, that legendary fig tart. But this morning, back to reality. The bells toll, the chill bites your toes, and your belly gently nudges you with the simple truth. You're already hungry again. Still, you rise, robe yourself, and shuffle toward the chapel like a quiet specter, knowing that breakfast awaits. And with it comes the eternal mystery of cheese and eggs, two humble foods that stir far more controversy in monastic kitchens than you'd ever expect. You see, the rule of Saint Benedict said nothing explicitly about cheese or eggs, but over the centuries, monastic orders interpreted things their own way. Some banned them entirely, equating both with rich food that tempted the flesh. Others allowed them in moderation, usually during non-fasting days, and only if the cheese didn't smell like ambition. Your monastery falls somewhere in the middle. Cheese shows up like a comet, rare, slightly holy, and often crumbly. It's usually goat cheese, soft and tangy, wrapped in leaves or cloth. You've heard tales of hard cheeses stored so long they become defensive weapons. But here, cheese is a seasonal treat, more likely to be slipped into a pottage than served on its own. And eggs? Even more complicated. Some abbots allow them, others don't. The argument often hinges on whether eggs are meat or not. Some say yes, because chickens are animals. Others say no, because eggs aren't fertilized. A few bold monks argue that if you don't hear clucking, it doesn't count. Historians still argue whether eggs were universally prohibited or inconsistently tolerated. The only thing they agree on, monks were creative in bending the rules. Today, as you approach the breakfast table, you spot them. 2 boiled eggs, sitting there, round and modest, like humble messengers of cholesterol and joy. The yolks are bright, almost golden. You whisper a mental prayer of thanks to whichever monk gathered them without waking the hens. You crack one open. The shell resists. The white is rubbery, the yolk slightly dry. It's not perfect, but it's warm, and it's not gruel. That's worth a psalm or two. The cheese appears at lunch. It's speckled with herbs, maybe thyme, maybe something Brother Anselm found growing suspiciously close to the latrine wall. You try not to think too hard. You cut a slice with your wooden knife, spread it on coarse bread, and take a bite. The flavor is sharp, salty. It makes your mouth water, and your eyes close just a little. There's something alive about cheese, something decadent. It feels wrong, but in a good, monastic, appropriate kind of wrong. Like reading a banned book, just to check if the rumors were true. Of course, such pleasures are rationed. You won't see cheese again for another fortnight, maybe longer. Eggs might pop up sooner, if the hens cooperate and Brother Malachi stops forgetting to shut the coop at night. He swears it's the wind. Everyone else swears it's his naps. Some monks grumble quietly about the inconsistency. Others claim the randomness is part of the spiritual lesson. Expect nothing, cherish everything. And they're right, in a way, because when you do taste cheese, or bite into an egg yolk still slightly soft in the center, it feels like grace. Small, edible grace. Later that day, you find yourself in the garden, tossing chicken feed, while the birds bob around like feathery monks. One of them stares at you. You nod back. Thanks, you whisper, too softly for scandal. You wonder, briefly, if anyone has ever written an ode to monastery cheese. You consider writing one yourself, quietly, in the margins of your psalter. Just a line or two. Something modest, something reverent. After all, the Lord gave manna. The monks got curds. You're sweating slightly as you carry a bucket back from the well. Your fingers numb, but your core flushed from effort. The day's work, copying texts, pruning herbs, moving firewood, has worn your body down to a slow, steady hum. And right now, nothing sounds holier than hydration. You duck inside the cool stone of the kitchen annex, where a barrel of drink sits near the wall. Not wine, not water, not even a broth. Ale, thin, brown, and barely alcoholic, but still ale. Holy hydration, as Brother Felix once joked before being assigned 3 weeks of garden duty. You dip the ladle. It splashes quietly, a scent of sour grain rising up. It's not refreshing in the modern sense. There's no fizz, no frost, no cucumber wedge, but it's safe. It's familiar, and unlike the well water, it probably won't kill you. You sip, and the taste is yeasty and flat, with the faintest memory of hops. It's nourishing, in the way that bread is nourishing, just wetter. And yes, monks brew it themselves, of course. The same hands that illuminate saints in gold leaf also mash barley and stir wort in great steaming cauldrons. Historians still argue whether monastic ale was brewed primarily for sustenance or as a clever workaround to fasting laws. After all, if it's liquid, it doesn't count as food, right? The truth is somewhere in between. The monks call it small beer, and it's weak by design, maybe 1% alcohol, just enough to sterilize. But occasionally, someone gets a little too generous with the malt. You know those days, people chant louder, Brother Marius smiles. A miracle. You think back to the monastery's big brew days, certain feast eves, or seasonal celebrations, when the monks are allowed a richer brew. The smell of roasting barley fills the air like incense. The ale is darker, thicker, and you drink it slowly, not because you're savoring, but because it hits harder than you remember. But most days, you just drink to keep going. Water is suspect. It depends on the source. Wells are inconsistent. Rain barrels taste like roof tiles. The stream behind the abbey has hosted at least 3 drownings and 1 suspicious eel. So it's ale, again. You pass Brother Anselm a cup as he stirs a pot of something green. He nods without looking. That's gratitude, monk style. You sit on the bench near the kitchen wall, sipping your brew, trying not to spill. You remember the one time someone dropped an entire mug in the refectory. The sound echoed like a cathedral bell. Everyone froze. Brother Matthew coughed for 30 full seconds, just to reset the mood. On fast days, you get less ale, just enough to wet your mouth, not your soul. The reasoning: you're supposed to feel hunger. Ale dulls it. Monks aren't here to feel dulled. You finish your drink and wipe the rim with your sleeve. Technically not required, but you saw Brother Hugo do it once, and now it feels like etiquette. There are whispers, always whispers, about certain monks brewing stronger batches and hiding them under floorboards. You suspect it's fiction, or wishful thinking, or maybe just Brother Felix trying to make dish duty more interesting. Still, the monastery's ale is honest. It reflects your life. It's simple, unrefined, and made with patience. And after a long day of cold stone, smoky robes, and 6 hours of transcription, it is just enough to take the edge off your thoughts. You stand up, your belly sloshes softly, your tongue feels sticky, but content. Outside, the sky has begun to gray. Another quiet cue that evening is near. You pass the barrel one more time and resist a second ladle. You're not here for indulgence. You're here for rhythm, humility, repetition. But also, maybe tomorrow you'll help with the brewing, just to supervise, spiritually of course. Evening settles in like a thick wool cloak, quiet, heavy, and faintly scratchy. The sky outside the cloister windows is a soft slate gray, and the breeze carries in the scent of cooling stone, dried herbs, and just the faintest whiff of wood smoke from the kitchen fire. You know what time it is. The bells don't even need to ring. Your stomach already knows. Collation. Sounds elegant, right? Collation. Like something that should arrive on silver trays. But no, this is your final meal of the day, and it is in every way humble, underwhelming even, but somehow still soothing. You shuffle into the refectory with your brothers. Everyone's movements are slower now, calmer. There's something about twilight that mellows the body. Or maybe it's that your feet hurt and your soul's been chanting since sunrise. You take your place at the table, hands folded, eyes lowered. The reader climbs the pulpit again, flipping through worn pages to tonight's reading. You hear the familiar cadence begin, a passage about patience, or quiet, or both. The meal arrives in silence, a bowl of beans, cold or lukewarm, depending on how long the servers had to wait for vespers to finish. There might be some stale bread, slightly toasted over embers if Brother Anselm was feeling generous. And that's it. No vegetables, no broth, just beans and bread. You take your spoon and dig in. The beans are soft, but not seasoned. They taste vaguely of yesterday. There's no salt, of course, too precious. No oil either, too luxurious. They've been boiled, drained, and politely dumped into your bowl, like something a kindly but distracted parent might serve you when they're out of ideas. The bread is hard. You crack a piece off and instinctively dip it into the beans to soften it. It helps, slightly. And yet, this meal has its charm. It's predictable, a quiet ending to a loud day. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to choose. You just eat. Chew slowly. Breathe between bites. Listen to the drone of scripture and the occasional throat clear from Brother Malachi, who still hasn't quite figured out how to cough discreetly. Across the table, Brother Hugo carefully arranges his beans into a circle before eating them clockwise. No one says anything. This is his routine, and in the monastery, routine is sacred. Historians still argue whether collation was intended as a spiritual fast or a practical feeding strategy. The word originally referred to the reading itself. Collations, spiritual reflections read aloud. But over time, the term became synonymous with this light meal. Maybe because the food and the words were meant to fill you equally. Maybe because monks are really good at renaming things to sound holier. There are no second helpings at collation. There's barely a first. It's not meant to satisfy. It's meant to settle you. To put just enough in your belly that you can sleep without dreaming of sausages. You remember the story of Brother Aldrich, who once snuck a fig into his sleeve during collation. He swore it was medicinal. No one bought it. He was assigned 3 weeks of copying obscure genealogies in the scriptorium. His handwriting still hasn't recovered. You finish your beans, using the last of your bread to wipe the bowl clean. There's something rewarding in that final swipe, like you're erasing hunger with bread. The reader closes the book. Heads bow. You rise. The benches creak as 40 silent monks stand as one, their bodies tired, their minds slowly unwinding. Back in your cell, the air is cooler now. You sit by the small window, letting the final light of the day stretch across the floor. Your belly is not full, but it's not empty. Your thoughts are quiet, your limbs heavy, and as your body settles into the rhythm of sleep, you think, not with longing, but with mild curiosity, what kind of beans those were. You decide on fava. You'll probably forget by morning, but for now, your day ends with beans and silence, and that, in its own strange way, is enough. Sometimes, though not often, the rules bend, not loudly, not openly, but with the kind of discretion that only silence can hide, and that's when you see it. A flash of color tucked beneath a robe, the faint scent of sweetness in the cloister breeze, or the crunch of something forbidden. Welcome to the secret world of fruit and nuts. Officially, monks aren't supposed to snack between meals. The rule says so, and yet, tucked behind the garden wall, or buried in the corner of the cellar, there exists a quiet economy of orchard snacks, apples, pears, chestnuts, and the occasional smug fig. No one talks about it, but you know it happens. You've seen Brother Felix with suspiciously sticky fingers after walking past the pear trees. You've spotted the pit of a plum abandoned near the compost pile, too clean to be accidental, too recent to be forgotten. And once, you caught Brother Anselm chewing with his eyes closed near the walnut shed. It was practically a confession. You're not above it either. On a warm afternoon, after labor in the garden, you pass the old apple tree. It's gnarled, leaning, and stingy with its fruit. But there it is, one pale green apple, slightly bruised, hanging like an invitation. You pluck it. You look around. No witnesses, except Brother Hugo's goat, and he's sworn to secrecy. The bite is crisp, sharp, tart enough to make your jaw twitch, sweet enough to make your eyes close. It's the kind of flavor that startles you after days of beige broth and bean paste. It tastes alive. It tastes like rebellion. Technically, this isn't a sin, unless it is. The rule is fuzzy here. You're not hoarding. You're not gorging. You're simply accepting nature's generosity while no one's looking. Historians still argue whether monastic orchards were meant for communal meals or quiet indulgence. The records are vague, the rules inconsistent. Some abbeys handed out seasonal fruit at table, others locked it away, unless a guest arrived. Still others let it rot, rather than risk enthusiasm. Your monastery falls in the let's pretend we didn't see that category. If a brother nibbles on a chestnut while hauling firewood, no one comments. If a novice appears with grape juice on his sleeve, it's assumed to be a spill, not a sin. There's something deeply satisfying about these moments. Not just the sweetness of the fruit, or the crunch of a filched walnut, but the smallness of it, the simplicity. One bite, one moment, and then it's gone. No gluttony, no indulgence, just a flicker of joy, like a candle in a long corridor. Of course, some take it too far. Brother Matthew once attempted to dry apples behind the furnace. It was going well until the smell wafted into the chapel during Compline. The abbot's eyebrows rose so high, they nearly achieved sainthood. Brother Matthew now manages the compost heap. Then there are the chestnuts. Earthy, meaty, and mildly controversial. Some consider them food. Others call them snacks. A few whisper that they're medicinal. You've seen more than one monk tuck a roasted chestnut into his pocket for later. Later, of course, being 5 minutes later behind the herb shed. Still, no one breaks the rule outright. There's no midnight banquet, no secret stash under floorboards, just these tiny edible exceptions to the otherwise relentless rhythm of monkhood. You finish your apple behind the garden wall, careful to bury the core beneath the rosemary. You wipe your hands on your robe, then press your fingers to your lips, not to taste, but to remember. These moments are fleeting, quiet, sweet, like grace itself, the kind you don't earn or plan, the kind that just appears when you're too tired to resist and too human to decline. Back in your cell, you settle in for evening prayers with a belly slightly more content and a secret smile tucked beneath your silence. You wake in the middle of the night, not startled, not scared, just awake. The air is still, and the stone walls around you hold the day's chill like a secret. Your mouth is dry. Your stomach gives a quiet, theatrical groan. It's not hunger exactly. It's something more spectral, a lingering itch in your gut that remembers dinner and suspects it wasn't enough. You lie there for a moment, staring up at the wooden beams, and think of a solution that's technically allowed medicinal brew. You rise quietly, careful not to wake Brother Hugo, whose snores have the rhythm of a distant drum. You wrap yourself in your cloak and pad barefoot to the infirmary annex, where Brother Illyric, resident herbalist, occasional mystic, and full-time fermentation enthusiast, keeps his collection of tonics, teas, and mysterious liquids in dusty glass bottles. You find him already awake, hunched over a mortar, grinding something green and fragrant. You look pale, he whispers, grinning. Or just dramatic. You don't answer. You're here for the brew. He gestures to a steaming pot in the hearth's shadow. Tonight's potion, a blend of chamomile, sage, and dried pear peel. It smells like a garden after rain and tastes like a wet bookshelf, but in a comforting way. You sip slowly, letting the warmth curl through your chest. The herbs aren't just for flavor. They're for healing, focus, sleep, digestion, melancholy, memory, and according to Brother Illyric, the calming of rebellious humors, which is probably a polite way of saying gas. Monasteries were often centers of healing. After all, historians still argue whether their herbal knowledge was passed down scientifically or simply preserved from older folk traditions. Either way, monks knew their plants. They could identify mint from 5 paces and chamomile by scent alone. You once mistook comfrey for valerian and ended up with a stomachache and a lesson in botanical humility. Some brews are gentle, like this one. Others, questionable. You've tasted one of Brother Alaric's more experimental mixtures, intended to cure drowsiness, but strong enough to strip paint. He called it a reviving draft. You called it a mistake. And then there's the gray area, the tonics that blur the line between medicine and merrymaking. There's a bottle near the back shelf, corked tight and dust-covered. No label, just a faint scent of anise and mystery. You've heard tales, one sip, and Brother Felix once wrote poetry for 3 days straight. He doesn't remember it. But tonight's brew is harmless, soft. It soothes your belly and quiets your mind. Brother Alaric sits beside you, sipping his own. You both watch the embers for a while, neither of you needing to speak. Silence isn't a rule at this hour. It's just what fits. Eventually, he nods toward the door. Go dream something worth remembering, he says. You return to your cell, hands warm around your middle, breath scented faintly with sage. You lie down again, the stone somehow softer now, the night quieter, and as your eyes close, you think this wasn't a snack, it was a prescription. Your last thought before sleep is of dried pear, steeped in a clay pot, somewhere between medicine and mercy. Morning comes again, slowly, grayly, and with the unmistakable hum of hunger just behind your ribs. You pull your habit over your head, stretching your arms through the wool sleeves with all the enthusiasm of someone who's been dreaming about roast goose. You shouldn't be, of course, but you are, because no matter how disciplined your soul, eventually the mind begins to wander, especially when it's fueled by pottage and silent prayer. You trudge toward chapel, muttering your opening prayers under your breath. But let's be honest, your thoughts aren't entirely with the saints. They're lingering on the edges of memory and imagination. Specifically, they're imagining meat. Meat, roasted, glazed, sizzling on a spit, carved with knives that actually work. You picture the fat crackling. You can almost hear it, the way the skin stretches and splits under heat, the smell rising into the rafters. Then guilt. Of course, you're not supposed to think like this. This is the food of nobles, of soldiers, of sinners, not monks, not you. You turn your thoughts toward discipline, humility, and the day's psalm. But the psalm starts to sound like a menu. O Lord, you prepare a table before me, and your stomach growls. Truth is, meat is forbidden for a reason. Saint Benedict wrote it out of the rule for a reason. Monks are supposed to be calm, focused, detached from bodily pleasure. Meat, too much pleasure, too much fire. And yet, you've heard whispers, you've read the stories. Historians still argue whether monks ever truly gave up meat, or just got really, really good at loopholes. Some orders allowed poultry, others permitted meat for the sick, which turned out to be about half the monastery during the coldest months. And some monasteries, they built separate kitchens, one for meat, one for vegetables. If the building was different, apparently the sin was too. There are records of guests being served meat and monks just happening to dine with the guests out of hospitality. You've seen the old bench by the kitchen door where Brother Matthew accidentally dropped roast scraps into his sleeve during a guest feast. You've also heard the tale of the goose dream. One monk during Lent dreamed he was being chased by a talking goose holding a carving knife. He woke up sweating, confessing everything, even the chicken leg he'd hidden under his mattress. He was reassigned to compost duty, and a fast so long, he forgot the word crispy. As you scrub root vegetables in the kitchen later that morning, your hands wet and red from cold water, the scent of onions does its best to distract you. But your mind, still wandering, you picture rabbit stew, thick and dark, a spit-roasted quail with herbs, a haunch of venison, steaming on a wooden board. You've never actually had venison, but you've imagined it enough to convince yourself it tastes like redemption. You remind yourself, this is normal, to long, to crave, to wonder. Even the saints, you suspect, daydreamed about roast boar once in a while. And yes, sometimes you dream of meat. In sleep, you sit at long tables with thick wooden trays, carving knives in hand. In your dream, no one judges, no one scolds. The abbot even asks for seconds. You wake with your mouth dry and your conscience slightly wrinkled. But you don't confess, not yet, because dreaming of food isn't gluttony. Not unless you start naming the poultry in the yard, and even then, you only named one. You push the thoughts away, plunging your hands back into the wash basin, scrubbing harder now. You'll make peace with your pottage again by lunch. You always do. For now, the meat dreams drift away like smoke from a forbidden fire. Evening falls like a slow curtain, folding light into shadow across the monastery's stone walls. The final prayers have been whispered, the candles snuffed, and the hallways are heavy with the sound of nothing. This is the final hour, the sacred stillness that settles just before sleep, when all that remains is breath, memory, and the hollow thrum of your stomach, wondering if it's supposed to feel this empty. There's no more food coming today, not even a sip of ale. Just you, your cot, and the quiet ritual of night fasting. You lie on your straw-stuffed mattress, arms tucked under your robe, and let your mind wander, not wildly, not greedily, but gently, like smoke rising in a cold room. You've gone an entire day, again, without meat, without spice, without choice, and somehow you're still here. Monks fast overnight, not because they're trying to punish themselves, but because stillness helps them hear the divine, hear their own thoughts, hear the quiet teachings that come only when the belly has gone silent. You learned early on, hunger at night is different. It's not the sharp growling kind that strikes at noon. It's softer, more like a gentle ache. It wraps around your core like a slow echo. At first it was unbearable. Now, it's something closer to a companion. The rule says nothing about what you're supposed to feel during the night fast, only that you endure it. But over time, you start to notice how your body changes, how your dreams grow sharper, your thoughts more fragile, your prayers less distracted. Tonight, you curl onto your side and pull your blanket up to your chin. The air is cool, your fingers still smell faintly of onion, and your breath is warm in the space beneath the blanket. Historians still argue whether night fasting was spiritually motivated or just logistically convenient. Less cooking, fewer supplies, easier mornings. But lying here in the dark, you suspect it's both. Your body slows, your mind quiets. Fasting isn't about pain, it's about space. Space to listen, space to reflect, space between the body's needs and the soul's whisper. You think back on your day, gruel so thin it nearly apologized for existing, pottage so thick it required strategy, a carrot glazed with honey that still haunts your dreams, an apple you definitely weren't supposed to take, chamomile tea that might have been 60% hot water, and that one shining moment, the boiled egg. No dish was remarkable on its own, but together they formed a kind of symphony, soft, repetitive, humble, just like the hours of your day, just like the rhythms of prayer and labor. You shift on your cot, wrapping the blanket tighter. The wind brushes against the stone outside. Someone down the hall coughs, once, then goes still. The monastery breathes as one sleeping body, and so your fast continues, until morning bells call you to gruel again. Not because you're being punished, but because simplicity is the rhythm, hunger is the teacher, and silence is the song. Let yourself drift now. The candles are out, the halls are hushed, and your spoon rests clean beside your robe. There's nothing left to do, nothing left to want, just the slow hum of your body, finding peace in emptiness. You feel the weight of the day slowly lift, like dust settling after a bell has rung. Your limbs sink deeper into the straw mattress, warmed by the shape you've left in it for so many nights. The stone walls no longer feel cold. They feel like keepers of stillness. The hunger, it's there, but quiet now, drowsy. It's not calling out for attention anymore, just humming softly, like a lullaby in your gut. A reminder that even without fullness, you are held. Your breath slows, in, out, in, out. The pace of monks, the pace of tides, the pace of time itself in a place where clocks don't matter, and somewhere, perhaps in the dream that waits just behind your eyelids, a loaf of bread sits on a wooden tray, steam curling up, a smear of goat cheese, a fig split open like a secret, not to eat, just to see, just to imagine, just to rest in the idea of it. Sleep now, quietly and deeply. You fasted well.